says level a minute ago. Okay. This way?
Sure, I
That
understand.
way?
We don't have that
Like the left
information.
side
That will
towards you?
come from the person who's requesting the service, the
Like
event
left
coverage.
left forward or
So
right
whoever,
forward?
so for this event, it's Andrea Matney. So that would have to come from her. We don't get that information directly or at all, really.
Like in other words, right forward or huh?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you could do that too, which is great.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. And I got your email. I apologize. I didn't respond to it right away. Okay. All right.
Huh? The hole is beneath the left one.
Yes, and it has been mentioned by Jean Marie,
Yeah, I don't know. What's
Jean
the
Marie.
deal?
Yeah. So that's
I
come
was
up.
far off when I
You're not the
looked at
first
it.
person to say it, and I just have no control over that portion.
Are the legs okay on the tripod?
turn it, mic, turn it, make this mic hot. Andrea's mic. You want to tell them, the captioner?
Captioner Beverly, this is Andrea. I just wanted to let you know that our presenter's name is Amy Bunk, B-U-N-K. At this time, you have it spelled incorrectly. Again, Bunk. Thank you.
You just put it back. Just keep it on. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 4 minutes.
I think we're good. Thanks. You're the best. Yep. It's still. I didn't touch it. I was a good girl. Yes, I got that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Keep telling me as we count down. It'd be helpful. Okay. So my name's Andrea.
I'm Lamar. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Lamar.
Hi, Amy.
Our presenter, Amy. One of our IT wizards, Glenn.
Hi.
So welcome to the National Archives. I guess you haven't been here all that long since we haven't met.
Yeah, no, I know.
What, the last 2
So
weeks?
It's Jason and Jamie's phone.
Cool. Also, for my mom, I was trying to coordinate with a friend to pick her up from the hospital, and then I was like 5 minutes before she's supposed to go there and get her, I was like, stop, don't get her. No, I don't think I'll, no, yeah, I know. I actually think I'll actually keep mine. Yeah, it's, yeah, I have, like I said, total respect for you.
Andrea, what website do you need to go to?
I need to get onto YouTube. And I'll need, yeah, and I'll need to do it incognito, otherwise it will probably grab my email, and I need to log in as the web program staff. So I have to do it. You can open up
Right here?
yeah. One more time. Where is it? Oh. It's usually, what browser are you in?
This is.
I usually use, yeah.
Chrome?
Mozilla, yep.
Oh, Mozilla, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's, no, this is fine. Try it one more time. Yeah, 1 minute. Yeah, it should be an incognito window.
Okay.
And then we're gonna start very soon.
Okay, welcome. Welcome to today's program. This is the National Archives Know Your Records program. We are broadcasting live from the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. My name is Andrea Matney, and we are so pleased that you are here today. Before we start, I would like to go over a few tips so you know how to participate in today's event. For our on-site audience, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the presenter at the end of the program. We ask that you please use the microphones in the aisles so we can capture you online. For our online audience, you can also submit questions to the presenter. Please log into the chat feature on this YouTube webpage, and then we will address them again at the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You will also find on this webpage hot links to live captioning and her presentation slides, so you can download those. So today's program is entitled The Federal Register and the Electoral College, and we welcome our presenter, Amy Bunk. Ms. Bunk is the Director of Legal Affairs and Policy for the Office of the Federal Register, National Archives and Records Administration, where she supervises the legal staff who review documents submitted for publication in the Federal Register and codification in the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, for compliance with the requirements of applicable law. She also administers the Office of Federal Regulation responsibility for processing the Presidential Electoral College and coordinated Electoral College functions with the Congress and state governments, including the District of Columbia. She received her J.D. cum laude from Syracuse University College of Law. Amy is admitted to practice in New York. And now for our presentation, Federal Register and the Electoral College. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our presenter, Amy Bunk.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we are quite busy in the office today, so bear with me if I get a little distracted. But the Electoral College is a process, it's not a place. And that's one of the things that we are reminding folks of, make sure I get this right, today in particular. So it's the states, not the people that elect the President of the United States. So on Tuesday, when everybody voted at the general election, what you did was vote for electors, and those electors will vote for the President. That vote will take place on December 19th. But just to give you a little background, so each state, again, selects the President, and they vote for the President. On Tuesday, we voted for the President. And in most states, the electors are divided up between the political parties based on the popular vote of the state. There are two states where that's different, and I will mention them in a minute. So, for example, Wisconsin has 10 electoral votes. Oops, wrong slide. Okay, so this is Wisconsin. These are the congressional districts. So this is how the votes are divided up. The Electoral College votes represent the number of people in the House of Representatives and the number of senators. So Wisconsin has 8 members of the House and 2 senators. So that congressional delegation is 10 people, and so they get 10 electoral votes. Maine, on the other hand, has 1 member of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, so they get 3 Electoral College votes. So for all of you listening online and here in the room, there are a total of 538 members of the Electoral College. And again, that's based on the delegations from the House and the Senate. And it also includes the District of Columbia. In the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution allowed the District of Columbia to have the same number of electors as the smallest states. So Vermont and the District of Columbia each have 3 presidential electors. We get this question every once in a while: what are the qualifications to be an elector? The qualifications on the federal level are what makes you not be an elector. So if you're a member of the Senate or the House of Representatives, you can't be a presidential elector. If you're a person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States, you can't be an elector. If you were an official engaged in the insurrection or rebellion against the United States, so if you fought in the Civil War on the side of the South, you can't be an elector. So here's the timeline where presentation, I didn't update this for Tuesday's election, so the we are here arrow should move just a little bit. So we're in between now, the general election and the meeting of the electors. So one of the questions that we've received this year, and so we've updated this presentation a little bit, is to talk about primaries and that impact on the presidential election. So that's all done at the state level. We don't get involved until after the general election. So our process hasn't started yet. We are going to start receiving the certificates of ascertainment, and that's when we go into sort of full Electoral College mode, but we have been answering questions up until then. So basically how electors are picked, they're chosen at state primaries. They're usually party officials who've been very active in the party. Each party in a state selects a slate of electors. So in Wisconsin, the Democrats selected 10 people as electors, the Republicans selected 10 people as electors, the Libertarians selected 10 people as electors. Again, so as I mentioned, most states are winner take all. Maine and Nebraska have divided their electors based on congressional district and at large. And it appears that Maine might have split their vote this year. We won't know that for sure until we see the certificates of ascertainment. In 2008, Nebraska split its vote, so Nebraska had 5 electors at the time. 1 elector was actually a Democratic elector, the other 4 were Republicans. If you're interested in seeing that certificate, we have it posted on our website. After the general elections, what state officials are busy doing now is they're preparing 7 original certificates of ascertainment. Those ascertainments contain the names of the political parties and all the electors that were selected by that party. So Wisconsin will set out the names and the number of votes for all the Democratic electors. They'll set out the names and the number of votes for all the Republican electors. They'll set out the names, the number of votes for all the Libertarian electors and any other party, and then they'll know which party and which slate of electors received the most votes. They create 7 of these documents and 2 certified copies or 9 originals. 3 of those copies they need to send to the Archivist of the United States before the meeting of electors. So here's an example of a certificate of ascertainment from one of the smaller states. You'll see there that it's hard to read, but what you'll notice is that there's just groups or chunks of information. Those chunks of information are the political parties that are highlighted, and then the names of the electors below and how many votes each of those slates of electors received. A couple more examples. So there are no federal requirements on the format. What we require is that it's signed by the governor, there's a seal, and then it sets out the lists of the slates of electors and the numbers of votes that they received. So you'll see some of them have the seal of the state at the top. Others have an embossed raised seal, and some the Secretary of State might have signed. You'll notice Hawaii on the left just has the governor. So as I mentioned, these 3 of these documents need to be submitted to the Archivist of the United States as soon as practicable after their states certify their election results. But we need to get them no later than December 19th. So they've got to get them to us before their electors vote. And we have in the past received amended certificates of ascertainment. And when we get amended certificates, we do post those online. So Sometimes there has been controversies as to appointing electors, so the deadline for states to certify their votes is December 13th of this year. In the past, in some of the Midwestern states, I guess I'm picking on Wisconsin today, if there's a snowstorm, they can get a substitute elector, but we need the paperwork on that. All right, so the meeting of electors. So as I mentioned, when we vote in the presidential election, we're voting for a slate of electors. So each state is electing its own slate of electors. And then on December 19th, those slates of electors will meet in their respective states. They don't meet as an entire group. And then they'll vote. Now, sometimes these votes are open to the public, sometimes they're not. That is a matter of state law. The certificate of vote contains the electors' actual votes for president and vice president. The electors are required to vote separately for both positions. So they contain two distinct lists, one for president and one for vice president. And what you'll see are the two lists here for the state of Missouri, and then below that, the second page of the certificate of vote has the signatures of all the electors. A couple more examples. You see the state of Delaware, very simple document, while Alabama is a little bit more ornate. But again, it's up to the state to decide how fancy they want their certificates to be. At the meeting of the electors, and if you remember back to the examples I just showed you, the electors record their votes on 6 original certificates of vote. These certificates of vote are then paired with the remaining certificates of ascertainment that the state has maintained, and then the electors pair the two together. They sign and seal and certify packets of electoral votes and then send them to state and federal officials. This question has come up a lot about faithless electors. Faithless elector is a person who does not vote for the candidate that they pledge to vote for. There are no federal requirements as to requiring that an elector vote for the person they pledge to vote for, but some states do have those requirements. Again, that's a matter of state law. If you go on our website, we've listed out the times that there has been a faithless elector. You can see that in our historical documents section. The statute requires that these certificate packets get mailed around to various state and federal officials, including the President of the Senate. Mr. Biden gets 1 copy. We get 2 copies are sent by registered mail, or sometimes the states use a commercial courier. 2 are sent to the Secretary of State within each state, and 1 is sent to the Chief Judge of the Federal District Court located where the electors met. This allows us to call back packages of the certificates if we don't receive them. So we'll meet with congressional staff. That's the next slide. Oh, no, the deadline for the states to get us the material is December 28th. So after this time, if we don't have a certificate of ascertainment and vote from a particular state, we'll start calling state officials. And if necessary, we will go to the state and get the packages ourselves. And especially when it's right around the holiday season and sometimes state offices are closed, it's been difficult to get a hold of them. As people in Washington, D.C. know, sometimes the mail service is a little slow. So we have contacted the state officials already. We have their names, and we keep in close contact with them to find out when we're getting their certificates. When we aren't getting their certificates in 2012, I was actually on the phone with state officials on New Year's Eve to try and make sure that we got their certificate package in time for the congressional vote count, because neither our office or Congress had their packages yet. So we are allowed to go get the certificates if we need to. So January 3rd, the new Congress assembles, and it's the new Congress, the newly elected Congress, once they're sworn in, that will be counting the vote. We will also meet with congressional staff just to make sure that they have all the certificates. So we get 2 packages so that if Congress doesn't get one, if Congress doesn't get Vermont's, and we get 2 Vermont packages, we can just hand one over to Vermont. Or we can hand one of the Vermont certificates over to Congress, and they'll have the certificate package for the count, the vote count. And we will also have a historical copy for ourselves and for public inspection later. All right, counting the Electoral Congress vote. So they count the votes on January 6th. They meet in a joint session, and they count the votes. If January 6th, it doesn't this coming year, but in the past when it's fallen on a weekend, Congress can issue a law that moves the date of the count. So in 2013, January 6th fell on a weekend, and Congress, by public law, moved the vote count up to the Friday. So it was January 4th was the vote count instead of January 6th. So that was part of the reason we were trying to get the certificates so quickly from states, because they had less time to get them. So after the vote count, the president is inaugurated on January 20th, 2017. So what happens is, as I mentioned, we get 2 packages from the states, and one we will give to Congress if Congress needs it. The other one we keep and maintain for a year in our office, and then we accession it to our parent agency, the National Archives and Records Administration. So here's a little information on our record group. It's record group 11.7 at the National Archives. The congressional certificates are also accessioned, and there's a little bit of information on my slide about the Center for Legislative Archives. And then for more information, we have a very robust website. We also have a map that goes back to the 1960 elections that you might find interesting. It's been quite popular. And I'm ready to take questions. Oh, and we've got one, and if you could just move to the, we got a couple.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, please make your way to the aisle microphones if you can. If you can't, maybe Ms. Bunk can repeat your question if you're having difficulty getting over to the aisle microphone.
And just remind me, too.
And if you don't mind, if you could explain what accession means for non-historians and archivists.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Accessioning means that we are turning over the record to the National Archives for permanent storage and for permanent public access. Yes, ma'am.
You indicated in one of your slides that the electors don't always have to vote for the parties to which they said they would vote, based on, I mean, some states say they have to, but other states leave it open. Has that ever happened when they voted for, when an elector voted for a party that their state did not go for?
I can give you a couple of recent examples. In, I believe it was 2004, one of the Minnesota electors voted for the Democratic vice presidential candidate, John Edwards, for president. So so that would be a faithless elector. In 2000, one of the District of Columbia electors abstained from voting.
Do you think that could happen in this election because it's so contentious?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I have some questions along the same lines, actually.
Okay.
My first question is, you said that state law and party rules determine the qualifications for electors, that there are very few federal qualifications.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can give us a few of the example state laws and party rules that set the qualifications for electors.
It would vary by each individual state and the District of Columbia, so I don't have any examples, I'm sorry.
You don't know of any, then?
I don't have any examples for you.
Okay, so as far as you know, an elector could be a non-citizen or a teenager.
Again, it would depend on each individual state law.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of other questions.
Okay.
When do electors actually get named, and how long after they get named can the party replace them?
So the electors aren't named and selected, well, until after the general election. Each political party selects a slate of electors, but they're just candidate electors. And how soon and when the party has to turn in the names of the electors to the state is, again, up to state law. I know in some states it varies by whether or not it's a major political party or if it's a third party.
So they have to turn in the names before the election at least?
Yes.
And after the election, can they unilaterally change an elector?
Well, if they have an issue with it, again, that's up to state law if they change out after the election. If they do change out after the election, what we require is state documentation that they did that.
So as far as you know, some state laws may permit the party to replace an elector even after the election.
You would have to check with a particular state.
That would be different in terms of state laws. And finally, you said that there are some states that prohibit faithless electors.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if an elector is faithless? Who gets that vote if it's contrary to state law?
Well, the elector would have already voted, so it's the penalty for the elector not voting for the party, for the candidate that they pledged to vote for that is, I think, what's in the state law.
So as far as you know, all the state laws that prohibit faithless electors have criminal penalties but do not provide for changing the vote if the elector is faithless.
I'm not, it's criminal or civil penalties for the elector, but I'm not aware of the state actually changing a vote.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to interject. And this is Andrea. Just appreciate the questions that we're getting. They're respectful, and I appreciate that you're trying your very best to answer questions from a factual point of view, as a Federal Register agent, not a state agent. So thank you very much for your questions.
Sir?
Two questions, if I may. Could you give us a little more detail about those states that decided to split their electoral votes and what caused that? And second, the one-person, one-vote dilemma that has come up in two very recent elections where the popular vote did not get the presidency. Do you envision any groundswell or movement to simplify and eliminate the Electoral College and go to a popular vote?
So let me answer that second question first. We have, since the election on Tuesday, we've been inundated with calls. And every 4 years, we get a lot of calls and emails regarding how to switch from an Electoral College process to a national direct election. And that's a constitutional amendment, so we refer people to our website, our page on the constitutional amendment process, but it comes up every election. As for the first election, I think, or for your first question about the states that proportion their votes, what happened in Nebraska was that one of the congressional districts, so each district then, it's whoever gets the most votes in that district gets the elector. So in 2008, there are 3 congressional districts in Nebraska, and so the 2 at large and 2 at large, and those 2 at large that represent the senators are statewide. And so the vote went Republican statewide, so those 2 electors were Republican electors. Of 2 of the 3 congressional districts in those districts, the popular vote went Republican. So those two districts provided a Republican elector. And then in the last district, that particular district went Democratic. And then the most votes were for the Democrats. So that elector who was selected was the Democratic elector. I think what's important, and maybe I can hit escape or Andrea can help me. Anyway, what's important to understand is that each political party selects a slate of electors before the election. And it's all of us when we vote at the general election that actually pick the electors. So there's no standing body of electors.
Did you want to backtrack?
I was going to go on our website and try and show.
Okay, you can keep talking.
So what I'm going to try and pull up here, or what we're going to do as a team, is
Unrehearsed.
Unrehearsed, yes. So thank you. Is to go and look at the Nebraska Certificate of Ascertainment and vote for 2008, and hopefully that kind of gives more of a visual demonstration of what I'm talking about. And while we're doing that, I will take the question. Thank you for waiting.
Sure. How was it originally decided that the president would be selected by the Electoral College instead of strictly by the popular vote? And also, when was that? Was it the Founding Fathers?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So again, the Electoral College has been with us since the Constitution and in our first presidential election.
And what was the thinking behind deciding to do it by Electoral College instead of by strictly the popular vote?
Oops, yeah, I better. I think there were concerns about the fact that most people couldn't read and were probably not as educated, and they figured that if the state legislature selected the electors, it would be people who had a background and were able to read and had more of a more knowledge of the country as a whole. But we have links to some of the Federalist Papers that discuss the Electoral College.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm on our website, and you can see this is the Federal Register's website. It talks about what we do on a daily basis. And we also have this link to our Electoral College page. And we have historical election results. And I'm going to 2012. Certificates of ascertainment. So this is Nebraska's 2008 Certificate of Ascertainment. And as we get in the 2012 Certificates of Ascertainment, we'll post them all like we did here. And here's where you'll see the top one is the Republican Party. And it says how many vote totals these slates of electors received for overall. The 1st Congressional District, the 2nd Congressional District, 3rd Congressional District. And then you'll see here's the Democratic Party, the total number of votes these electors received, and then the vote distribution by Congressional District. I'm going back out now to the certificate of vote. Going to Nebraska. Oh, okay, so maybe it was 2012. I apologize. Or what? I'm on 2012. I'm sorry, I wanted to be 2008. Let me go straight to the certificate of vote. And of course, this one's a little harder to read, and I can't seem to blow it up. We also have, so if you can't read the certificate online, we have this handy little link where we've set out the text. So here we talk about the total number of votes, and you'll see we have a note here that says Nebraska distributes its electoral votes proportionally with 2 at-large electors. And the McCain-Palin ticket won Nebraska's overall and would be represented by the at-large electors, as well as the electors from districts from the 1st and 3rd Congressional District. And it says, however, the Obama-Biden ticket won the 2nd Congressional District and thus is represented by 1 elector. So it was the 2008 election. I apologize for being on the wrong certificates. Does that help? A little bit. I've got more research to do. Okay. Do we have any online questions?
Thank you for asking. We do not have any online questions, and so I think we'll wrap up. Thank you for being such a good sport. It looks like a gentleman does have one more question. If you can make your way to the aisle microphone. And this will be our last question for the day. Thank you.
Bruce Green, Archives member. Are there any publications that you could recommend that we could just like read, books or any type of knowledge like that you know of? Thank you.
So we publish a couple pamphlets on, we've got them on our website. We've also got an extensive FAQ on our website. We have a link for state officials, and you might find that helpful. This is our pamphlet. What this sets out are all the constitutional and statutory requirements for the Electoral College process. And we also have an extensive FAQ. That I can get back to. That we've been developing over the years.
Thank you, Amy. That was helpful. So that, what is the webpage that people should start with to access where you're located now to get to the FAQs? Is it just put in archives.gov and then?
I'm thinking if you put in archives.gov and search Electoral College, that the search result will have this page.
Yeah, I think that would work. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
So please know that the presentation video recording will remain online, as well as the presentation slides as a handout on this YouTube webpage, on the Know Your Records webpage. So on behalf of the National Archives and our presenter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.